Guys, welcome back to Honest Straightforward Reviews. Today I am excited to bring to you guys a thorough look at the RTX 5090. I appreciate I've been a bit late, but I'm a one-man show and everything I do is done by my own funds. So I fund everything. I don't get any external funding. So if you appreciate this unbiased approach to my reviews, please do subscribe, like and comment on my videos to support my work. In today's video, I'm comparing the last three generations of NVIDIA top tier graphic cards, which is the 5090, 4090, 3090 and 3090 Ti. Now before we continue, I'd like to let you guys know the system specifications. So the motherboard I was using for this test is the Aorus Master X870E. The RAMs that I have are about 32 gigs, there's 16 each, and they're at CL30 with 600 megahertz overclock. I have the CPU being cooled by the EKAIO 360mm. It's a DRGB cooler, so if you guys know much about it, it's a 360mm, and I've got 5 fans on there. So 2 push and 2 pull fans on the radiator to keep the CPU nice and cool. I've got a total of 9 Arctic fans on my system to keep it cool. I've got a Ryzen 9800X 3D and I'm using thermal grizzly pry knot paste between the cooler and the CPU. Now let's look at some of the prices here for the GPU, the specs and clocks. So the 5090 was supposed to be about $2,000 the 4090 was about $1,800 the 3090 Ti was $1,000 and the 3090 was $900. Now I'll be actually looking at the end. If you guys are new, by the way, I look at the end with the frames per dollar, so I look at the cost performance base and I'll be using Australian dollars for that. So just a heads up, this is USD, by the way. Looking at the cores, the 5090 has the most, which is 21760. The 4090 had a massive 16384 and the 3090 Ti had 10752 with a 10496 for the 3090. Looking at the ROPs, they're about the same between the latest generations, but looking at the 30 series, they were 112. Looking at the clock speed, the core clock for the 5090 is at 1750 and boosts up to 2407. The 4090 has a lower clock, 1313, but it boosts higher to 2520, which is the same base clock for the 3090 Ti, 1313. However, it only boosts up to 1950. The 3090 is at 1219 and boosts up to 1695. The transistors we're looking at is 92200 million for the 5090, 76300 million for the 4090, 28000 million for the Ti, and the same for the 3090. 5090 is NVIDIA's first consumer graphic card GPU that is not only 32 gigs, but it's 32 gigs at GDDR7. So 3 things: 32 gigs, GDDR7, and at 512-bit. Before that, the maximum you could get was 24, which was true for all previous generations, and they were GDDR6X, okay, and they were all at 384-bit. Looking at some noise relative to temperature comparison, looking at the 5090, the temperature was about 77 degrees and the fan noise was about 40 decibels. The fan was spinning at 1643 RPMs and the VRAM was quite toasty at 94 degrees. The 4090 was a bit cooler at 65 degrees with a fan noise of 35 decibels, which is really good, and the fan speeds were about 1449 RPM, and the VRAMs were quite nice at 72. Now, don't get too alarmed by the 90s, over 90s. They're made to sustain that. So anything over the hundreds, that's when you start seeing throttling. So you don't want it to go over the hundreds. That's when your system starts feeling a bit sluggish and you lose performance. Looking at the TI, we have 74 when it's gaming, 43 decibels, 1601 RPMs, and it was at 86 at the VRAM. Now, the 3090 was at 73 with the 44 decibel, 1802 RPM, which is the highest and the loudest card in here. And its VRAMs are around 95 degrees, which is the highest. Now, you might ask why the VRAMs are at 95 degrees, and it's been improved by nearly 10 degrees on the TI. And the reasoning for that is if you look back when you were interested back when these came out, then 3090, they made the mistake of having the VRAM all on one side, whereas the TI, they put some of the VRAMs behind it, and it was cooled by the back plate as well. So it was taking advantage of that, hence a massive 9 degrees cooler. Let's look at some of the AI stuff first of all. So what I'll be doing is just some productivity, some benchmarks in regards to that. Then we'll get into gaming, and in gaming I've got for you guys the average FPS, the 1% lows, the average of all of them. Then I'll be looking at the cost value for the average, then the 1% lows towards the end, and I'll be giving you guys the verdict towards the end as well, so do stick around. Looking at the first test, you've got SD Forge, and that has Flux 1 Dev and FB16 with 30 steps. I am running this test on these GPUs. So the 5090 does it in 3 seconds, generates an image. The 4090 generates an image in 15 seconds. The TI does in 40, and the 3090 does 40 as well. So 3 seconds. Wow, that's really good. I mean, the 4090 was fantastic, but the 5090 is really, that extra VRAM I think is helping out as well, and the GDDR7 with the faster bitrate as well. Looking at AI upscaling, Topaz, we have, I think I was suffering from some graphical issues or drivers not being optimized for it, but the 5090 didn't make sense at being 154, the slowest out of all of them. The 4090 was at 94, the fastest. Then we had the TI at 148, and the 3090 was 150. There's not much of a difference between these two last cards. Looking at some large language models, running them, and I was running Mistral. I had a 7-second response with the 5090. With the 4090 it was 10, and the TI and 3090 were 11. So not much of a difference between them, but the 5090 does come out quite a bit ahead. Looking at Blender, and I'm running Monster, I had the 5090 at 89, and the 4090 at 127, the TI at 212, and the 3090 at 217. So in Blender, the 5090 really does do quite well, and yeah, even the 4090 does really well as well. Looking at our last benchmark, it's Adobe Photoshop 2025 Pugent benchmark, and the higher the score, the better. The 5090 really pulls ahead by 16,623, which is nearly 4,000 points ahead of the 4090, and the 4090 is about 2,500 ahead of the TI, and the TI is only about 200 ahead of the 3090. Okay, first game I have for you guys is Black Myth Wukong. Everyone's talking about this game at 2K. The 5090 takes the cake at 84 frames and a 1% low of 59, which is quite good. The 4090 was at 68 and has a 1% low of 38. The 3090 Ti was at 45 with 1% of 35. Again, not much of a difference between the 3090 and the Ti. 40 and 31 for the 3090. So quite good to see the generational gap between them. But when we get to the cost of the card, especially with the market now, you guys might appreciate how difficult it is to actually recommend any of these cards. Let's look at the next slide. We have the 4K results for the same game. 5090 is at 58 and 48. 4090 is at 43 and 33. Ti is at 28 and 20, and the 3090 is at 25 and 18. So again, nice chunks of improvement between them. Looking at Counter-Strike 2, by the way, if you're interested in RT scores, I have RT in these tests as well towards the end. Looking at the 5090, we have Counter-Strike 2 at 2K at 579 and 379. We have the 4090 at 451 and 313. We have the Ti at 314 and 201. We have the 3090 at 289 and 192. It's quite impressive that the 4090's 1% lows is almost as good as what the Ti can dish out. But the 5090's isn't. So if you look at the 5090's 1% lows, they're not as good as the average FPS for the 4090, but the 4090 was a really massive improvement over the last generation. Looking at Counter-Strike 2 in 4K, we have the 5090 at 348 and 202, 4090 at 229 and 165, Ti at 168 and 127, 3090 at 152 and 121. Again, you can see the 4090's 1% low is almost as good as what the Ti gets on an average. This is really impressive, guys. However, when we go to the current generation, it doesn't really get there. Looking at Cyberpunk without RT turned on at 2K, you have 209 for the average for 5090 and 140 for the 1% low. 4090, 155 and 116. Ti 107 and 65. 3090 at 95 and 53. Now here, what is impressive is the 4090's 1% lows are actually better than the average of the 3090 Ti. Very impressive for the 4090. We're looking at 4K. 5090 is a 109 to 84. 4090 is 74 to 67. Ti is at 53 to 41. 3090 is 47 to 40. So looking at The Last of Us at 2K, we have the 5090 at 165 and 145. We have the 4090 at 123 to 112. We have the Ti at 83 to 68. We have the 3090 at 77 and 65. By the way, looking at these now, it's really turning up. The 4090 is really going ahead. The 1% lows are really well. Looking at the 5090, the 1% lows have finally overtaken the 4090, which is good to see. Looking at The Last of Us 4K, we have the 5090 at 108 and 97, 4090 at 76 and 63, Ti at 51 and 41, and 3090 at 46 and 33. Again, massive improvements between the generations. Looking at Star Wars Jedi Survivor at 2K, 5090 at 191 and 151, 4090 at 168 and 143, the Ti at 89 and 78, the 3090 at 73 and 62. Again, massive improvements between the 30 series and the 40 series, but not much with the 40 series and 50 series. Looking at the same game at 4K, we have 5090 at 102 and 88. We have 4090 at 84 and 72. we have the Ti at 651 and 40, and we have the 3090 at 37 and 29. Baldur's Gate 3 at 2K, we have the 5090 at 207 and 174. We have the 4090 at 207 again, but a 1% low, not as good, of 168. So here it feels a bit bottlenecked by the CPU. Looking at the Ti 151 and 145 and the 3090 at 135 and 120. Going on to 4K is where we can see the separation between the cards. Looking at the 5090, we have 177 to 136. We have the 4090 at 140 to 110. We have the Ti at 89 to 78 and the 3090 at 79 to 58. Looking at the next game, this is our first game with ray tracing turned on. Alan Wake 2 at 2K is 108 and 91 for the 5090. 4090 81 to 70. Ti is 54 to 43 and the 3090 is 49 to 39. Looking at the 5090, it has improved quite a bit, and I'm quite impressed by how high the 1% lows are. Looking at 4K for the 5090, it's 60 and 52, 5090 60 and 52, 4090 45 37, Ti 30 29 23, and 3090 is at 28 and a 22. Next game I have for you guys with ray tracing from here on enabled for all the games is Silent Hill 2 Remake. At 2K you have the 5090 at 92 and 81, the 4090 at 78 and 67, the Ti at 50 and 41, and the 3090 at 46 and 38. Looking at 2K, we have the 5090 at 59 and 46. We have the 4090 at 46 and 33. Very impressive there for the 5090. We have the Ti at 27 and 22, and we have the 3090 at 26 and 20. Elden Ring 2K, we have the 5090 at 90 and 79. We have the 4090 at 90 and 77. We have the Ti at 61 and 54. We have the 3090 at 58 and 46. When we go on to 2K, we get a 73 to 65 for the 5090, 65 to 56 for the 4090, 43 and 35 for the Ti, and 41 and 35 for the 3090. So not much of a difference between the 3090 and the Ti, but then the generation improvements really happen, especially for the 4090. Looking at Cyberpunk with ray tracing at 2K, we have the 5090 at 108 and 94, 4090 at 83 and 68, Ti at 52 and 44, and 3090 at 46 and 42. When we go on to 2K, we have the 5090 with ray tracing turned on at 58 and 50, 4090 at 42 and 35, the Ti at 26 and 21, and the 3090 at 22 and 17. That was the last game for our benchmarks for the gaming. Let's get into the average for 2K gaming. For 2K gaming, the 5090 has an impressive 183.3 average frames with a 1% low of 139.3, which is really good for 2K gaming. If you've got a mid-range 2K 144 hertz monitor, if you lock that in at about 138, you shouldn't have any drops there, except for the 0.1% lows. Maybe they would be different, but you'll need to check your graphic cards out. You shouldn't have any ups and downs as much. Now, if you look at the 4090, you have 150.4 average, and the 1% lows is really impressive, still at 107.2, 117.2. Looking at the Ti, you have 100.6 and the 1% low of 77.4. The 3090 is at 30.8 and 68.8. Next, slide I have for you guys is the 4K average for all the games. The 5090 is at 115.2, very impressive for 4K average gaming, and the 1% low being at 86.8, which is higher than the 4090's 84.4. So very impressive there. The 1% lows for the 4090 is 67.1, which is higher again over the TI, which is at 56.5 with a 1% low of 44.8. The 3090 sits right up behind at an average of 50 frames point 3 and low 1% lows of 39.3. Let's move on to the next slide. This is a very new slide that I've included for you guys. So in this slide, what I'll be doing is I'll be looking at what they should have retailed for, not what they're retailing for now, and also the real world prices right now. So here, obvious thing that'll happen is the older generation cards will look a lot better because they are cheaper now, but they're second hand, and if you can find them at a reasonable price. Looking at retail for the 5090, you have $4,100. That's what it should have sold for, but they're selling for around $6,000 and more just for the card. For the 4090, and they have just come in stock, so Centacom and Scorp Tech and all these massive computer places, they have it in stock, but they're for around even 7,200. I saw one of them. The 4090 should have launched for 27.59 Australian dollars, but you can find them secondhand for about $4,000. Now the reason you can only find them for secondhand is the Nvidia motto, where they stop producing months ahead before a launch. So when they were launching the 5090 around the end of Jan, they stopped production of the 4090 around September 2024. Okay, so that's why you don't have stock, and that's why the prices don't go down for the older generation. Looking at the TI, it should have sold for $27.89, and you can find it for around $1,900 give or take if you barter with them. The 3090 launched for about $2,500 because of all the scalping back then, and the scalping back then wasn't happening because of the AI boom, which we are suffering from now, but because of the crypto mining back in when everyone was locked down inside their homes. You can find one for around $1,300. Now, the best performing GPU based on cost per frame, take this with a grain of salt, because the price I've used is retail. I haven't done it. You guys can do it yourself for the retail if you want, or if you want me to include it in my tests, please do comment below and let me know. Look, we would like to see that actually, so I can include the real world as well. So looking at the cost per frame for all the GPUs, the bottom GPUs will come out a lot more expensive because I have used whatever they sold for 4 years ago. So their prices, you can't take it much at that, but it just shows you if there's an improvement. So the 5090 over the 4090 is, by the way, the cheapest GPU when it comes to cost per frame. Okay, it's by far not the cheapest GPU. It was more than double the price of the 3090, but looking at it, the improvements of it was about $32.69 for 4K gaming and about $18.34 for 2K gaming. Then it is the 5090 at $22.37 for 2K gaming and $35.59 for 4K gaming. After that, we have the next cheapest GPU, depending how you look at it. If you look at it for 4K, the TI is cheaper at $49.36, but it's a bit more expensive at 2K gaming at $27.72, whereas the 3090 is cheaper at 2K gaming by a bit, but at $27.53, whereas at 4K gaming it's at $49.70. Next slide, the last slide I have for you guys, is the 1% lows. So cost per frame for 1% lows. You have again the 4090 coming out on top, both for 2K and 4K gaming, followed by the 5090, and this time around you have the Ti beating the 3090, both on 2K and 4K. Now, given the cost of these GPUs, given how expensive they are, you used to be able to, just 4 years ago, you used to be able to build a whole system based on the cost of a 4090. Okay, now you can't even look at a system at the cost of the 5090, given that is $7,000. That is absolute rubbish. I think if you've got a 3090 or a 3090 Ti, I'd hold on to it. If you've got a 4090 Ti, definitely hold on to it and give this generation a miss, a complete miss. It's a complete mess right now, unless if Nvidia does the right thing and brings out more GPUs, bringing the price back down to about $4,100. Still, it's a bit expensive. You can't, there's not much value in it. The 4090 has a better value. You can't increase the performance. For example, if you had something that is better performing than the last generation, but it costs more. So if it was better performing by 15% over the 4090, but the cost was up by 100%, that just doesn't make sense. You might as well stick with your 4090 if you've got one. I would definitely stick with the 4090. I would be really happy. I'd give the 5090 a miss. And if you do AI stuff, the 5090 does make a lot of sense with the VRAM upgrade, the higher VRAM at 32 gigs, the higher speeds, and the GDDR7. But other than that, I would completely give this miss. It's such a heartbreak of a situation for any gamer out there. No one should have to spend just $7,000 on a GPU just to be able to game. That's just complete silliness. Anyways, guys, that's basically it from me. I hope you guys enjoyed my review, and thank you for staying to the end. Remember to support me as much as you can, and if you like this, please super like it as well. That helps out. Thank you so much for watching it to the end. Take good care. Bye-bye.
Planted.